Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about privacy. We're going to talk about PII. As a reminder, PII stands for Personally Identifiable Information. I'll define that, kind of explain what it means, as well as explain how it's relevant to you as a human being in this technological age. Then we'll talk about the data breaches and how important that is. We'll talk about a case study of a very important person who has changed cybersecurity for the rest of history. His name's Edward Snowden. I'll explain who he is and why he matters, as well as talk about insider threats and how he was an insider threat. And we'll talk more about the nuances there. And then we'll get a bit more technical. We'll talk about what happens when a hacker actually gets into your network and what I've done as a incident response manager and how we've tried to track some of these attackers in the past. This is the purpose of using a honeypot or a honeynet and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to break these down bit by bit. There are elements in here that are really important and things that you can directly take from this class to teach to your kids, teach to your friends or your family members, because these are the lessons that are going to truly make a difference in you and your friends' lives. So let's start by talking about some definitions. Now, if you remember, I'll pull up that, um, I'll pull up that image again. But when we were talking about information security, I mentioned that information security tends to be like a rather broad topic. Information security involves cybersecurity. Now, the place that we're going to mainly focus around today is we will talk a little bit about incident response, but where we're going to focus on is here, privacy. Now, the concept of privacy is definitely a part of information security and definitely tied to cybersecurity because privacy is centered around you, the individual. It's centered around you, your information, your name, your email, your phone number. It's centered around protecting the confidentiality of you and your own life. The reason why this is important is because, as a reminder, the main job for us as cybersecurity professionals is to protect human life. And because we care about protecting human life, we need to protect their privacy. Their privacy and their information is directly tied to them as a person. If I, as a threat actor, am able to find information about a person, especially where someone lives, well, then there can be actual harm and damage done to that person. So privacy is the main center here. Something else I want to mention is that if you're interested in a cybersecurity career, there is an entire industry purely focused on privacy. You can become a privacy analyst with very little experience. You just have to have a passion for privacy, understand some key terms, understand cybersecurity principles and basics, and have a passion for essentially like protecting information overall. I've met some privacy analyst professionals in the past. They said they really enjoy the field because there's a lot of work. It is tangential with legal because you're working with data compliance and data governance. We'll define what those are here later on, but privacy is a central part. So if you're interested in that, keep that in mind as a potential avenue for cybersecurity. As you'll recognize, privacy is not, I would say, inherently quote unquote technical. Of course, if you work in cybersecurity, you'll need to be able to do vulnerability assessments. You'll be able to do forensics, incident response. All of these are true and real cybersecurity jobs that exist that do require technical chops as well as experience. However, the areas that are, I would say, a bit more, I don't want to say they're easy to get into, but I would say that they have a lot less burnout because I'm not going to lie to you, cybersecurity is hard. When you work in the blue team, meaning you're responding to incidences, there has to be coverage 24/7. If there is not coverage and there's an incident that happens 3 in the morning and no one's covering it, that's not good. Whereas for these are less reactionary. Working in privacy and GRC is more proactive. So when we're talking about privacy, something to remember is that we are trying to protect PII, personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information is anything that can tie the information to you. That means maybe it's your name, maybe it's your email, phone number, your home address, maybe it's your national insurance number, maybe it's your passport number. It's anything that anyone can tie to you as an individual. It's really, really important that you understand that because as an organization and as a business, wherever you work, that business has a duty and a responsibility to protect that personal data. That is why the whole entire cybersecurity industry exists. It exists because there is a whole group of threat actors out there that are trying to get their hands on your data. When they get hands on your data, there are multiple things that they can do. They can steal your identity. They can impersonate you. They can steal your, change your information, get your bank account information. If they get into your email, one of the places where you do a lot of your communication, they could steal a lot of very sensitive information about you. So it's really important that we protect it as cybersecurity professionals. Now, I think I pretty much summed up why it matters to you as a cybersecurity professional, why it should matter to you as an individual. Because now that you're learning cybersecurity, you can't just say, oh, I'm learning cybersecurity. You have to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk, meaning you have to implement, you have to understand all of your own privacy elements and how to protect it. And there are small ways you can do that, which I'll explain later on. But it's not just important to you, it's also important to the government. So the EU has done a phenomenal job in essentially spearheading privacy. They spearheaded it through a concept called GDPR. Some of you might have heard this before. If this is your first time, GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. So what does that mean? It is a law in the UK and in the EU that essentially protects your data. It protects your rights. Not only does it protect your rights in the EU, but it protects your rights overseas. If you have an EU address, an EU email address, or any piece of data that ties you to the EU, even US companies, even companies in Australia, companies all over the world have to adhere to GDPR guidelines. Now, what exactly are GDPR guidelines and laws? It means that they essentially have to categorize your data. They have to know what data they hold on you. They need to know where that data is stored and how it's being processed. It also gives you the right as a consumer to say, hey, I want you to delete all my data. I want you to change data, and I want to see all the data that you have on me. These are three things that you can ask any company that stores your data today. You can email them and say, hey, can you tell me what data you have on me? Typically, a good company will have a website that says to ask about your data, you can check our privacy policy, or you can reach out to us here. Typically, they'll have a form where you can fill out, and then they have an SLA, which stands for a service level agreement, where they have to get back to you within a certain amount of time. It can typically be between 2 weeks to 30 days because maybe that team has to gather all that information before sending it over to you. GDPR is a really powerful regulation that has been put on companies to force them to be better about tracking your data and using your data. More often than not, companies are not using your data as efficiently as they should, meaning they don't need to store your data for 10 years. That's called data retention. You should have a data retention policy where you only store data for however long you need it, and when you don't need it anymore, you can delete it. Now, of course, there are legal things that you have to keep for a certain amount of time, but they also have regulations on how long they can store data. Now, with GDPR having come out, I implemented GDPR best practices for a lot of clients when it first came out. And it took a lot of work. It was a lot of work to make sure there was a mechanism in place. It was a lot of work to make sure they understood what data was there and how we're processing it and whatnot. But it was beneficial because not only did it protect the individuals, but it also helped the company understand what data they were working with so that they can set the right controls in place. What are the ramifications if you're not GDPR compliant? Well, there are two. If you're not GDPR compliant and someone puts in a complaint to you about you, well, then you can be charged a lot of money. I think it's between 3 and 4% of all of your profits. If you're a big organization, that's a lot of money. So there's a literal fine tied with not being GDPR compliant as of today. Now, one of the great things about GDPR is it spurred a lot of movements. In the United States, it spurred something called CCPA. So CCPA is generally the same thing as GDPR, meaning that anyone who is a California resident can go ahead and do the same thing that GDPR people can, meaning they can say, hey, what data of mine do you have? I want you to delete my data, so on and so forth. So when it comes to GDPR and CCPA, this is what we call information privacy laws. These are mandated by the governments that said all companies that are storing data and information, well, we need you to adhere to these rules and these laws. You might be asking yourself, well, why is it so important that governments are getting involved and trying to have us protect our own data? Well, it's a multitude of reasons, but the biggest reason why that's important is due to, I missed it. It's due to data breaches, okay? So we'll talk about data breaches and how that's associated with PII data here in a bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about Target. There's also a video out there that I want to show you all. But when we already talked about PII, I already explained all of this. Phone numbers, PII, such as passwords and answers are important because typically when people write their username and passwords, well, then they tend to include some personal information. If you ever make a username and password and then it asks you for security questions, a good practice, I'll tell you right now, is to make your answers completely different from the actual question. If it asks you, what is your mother's maiden name, or what city were you born in? Make sure to put something that only you know, not the actual truth. So for example, if it's asked me, what is my mother's maiden name? I'll put something like, uh, no one get upset, but I was a Manchester United fan when I was growing up, and so I would put something like Manchester United. It's no longer my team, so that's no longer my security question. However, it has nothing to do with my mother's maiden name. This is a great way to be more private and just be more secure. You don't want to include, you don't want to include personal information as your passwords. For example, don't put the year that you were born. Don't put the year, don't put your dog's name, or don't put your kid's name. Don't use your phone number for your passwords. These are all ways that you can essentially lose access and get a data breach. Okay, so if that is one of your passwords now, this is your sign to go ahead and update that password. As an addition, we already talked about Keeper last time, right? If you haven't already, it's important to start using a password management tool. We already talked about how PII is in relation to cybersecurity, because in cybersecurity, the entire goal here is to protect PII data. That is the entire scope. It's essentially to make sure that we are protecting data for ourselves as well as protecting data for the organizations. Okay. All right, let's do a little quiz here. Quit and let me post here so you can type in your answer. Hit answer. Let's go ahead and pin that. So, true or false? Providing your email address to an online shopping website for order confirmation constitutes a breach of personally identifiable information. True or false? Providing your email. All right, we got a mix of answers there. So the actual answer here is false. So the reason why it's false is when you're giving your email, that's you giving it willingly, okay? That's you giving your information to a shopping website. Now, that being said, there are ways to protect yourself more. So there is this site, it's called privacy.com. And privacy.com is centered around protecting your personal data. It has things such as you're able to give a different payment information that isn't your actual credit card. However, it is similar to your credit card. The idea here is that if when you give your credit card or when you give your email to an online shopping company, if they get hacked, you have no control of where that information goes. So privacy.com has tools that enable you to protect your card information. There are other services out there where you can use different emails, but this is just an example of one of those. All right. Next question. Question 2. If a bank asks you for your social security number during an account application process, it constitutes as a data breach of personal identifiable information. True or false? All right. That is correct. It is false. Again, this is giving information willingly. They need your social security number in order to do operations in that bank. So the answer to this would be false. Good job to you all who got it. If you marked it as true, I understand why you would. However, think of it this way. When you're giving an online shopping business your email, or when you're giving a bank an email, the idea is you're giving it to an organization that you trust. This is why reputation is so important to companies, because when you have a good reputation, people feel more trusting of giving you their information and their data. At the end of the day, these organizations are only as powerful as the data they hold, meaning that you, the consumer, have the power to make decisions on which companies are good and which ones have a good reputation and which ones don't. Okay. For when you're like thinking about if there's a PI breach or not, think of it as, does this company need it for operational purposes? Okay. And reputation is really important there. All right. Next question. Posting your full home address and phone number on a public social media platform constitutes as a breach of PII. True or false? Oh, I forgot to put the question. Thank you. Thank you all for waiting. Okay, looks like we have that one. All right. So the answer to this is indeed true. Let's talk about this for a second. So what this question is saying is, if you have Instagram, if you have Facebook, if you have Twitter, and you put your full home address as well as your phone number yourself on these public forums, meaning that it's completely public, does that constitute as a breach of PI data? The answer is yes. Even though you are giving it willingly, there is absolutely no rhyme or reason why this should be out there. I have a very specific relationship with social media because to me, there's really no need for me to broadcast to everyone what I'm doing and where I am. The reason why is because I have seen what threat actors do with that information. What we've done in the past on Red Team and Pen Test is we've looked up different employees, not just their LinkedIn, but we've looked up their whole name. We looked up their Instagram. We looked up their Facebook. We looked for any information that would give us an edge. We looked up what coffee shops they go to, where they live, how long it takes them to commute to work. The reason why we did that was so that one of our teammates could go ahead and commute with them and scan their card. When we scan their card, we're able to go in and out of the building. So all of this can be gathered on social media, especially if it's being made public. Now, some of you might be sitting here thinking to yourselves, oh, wow, my kids use social media all the time. I'm not here to try and scare anyone. I am here to warn you of the things that are capable of being done. Social media is a great tool to stay connected. I still use it to stay connected with friends and family all over the world. However, what you control in social media is what you post publicly. how big of a net you're casting. The reason why I say that is because if you post a story or a post on any of these platforms and it has your unit number, it's a selfie with you in your new house or you in your new apartment. Believe it or not, that one number, seeing your unit number or seeing your house number, is sufficient for a threat actor to find out where you live. There are very powerful people on the internet who are able to decipher anything about just one picture and find out the exact location. There are games and competitions of just that. What I'm trying to say here is personally identifiable information should be kept personal. It should be kept only to you. There's no reason to be posting it or spreading it everywhere. The same thing can go for your birthday. If you're posting about your birthday or when your birthday is, well, then that's another way that someone can find out your information. They just know the month and day when you're born. Now they just need the year, and they can piece that together with all the other information they found online about you, email, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, yes, Jagnesh is absolutely right. So if you don't know what metadata is when you take a picture, you can take any picture in the internet, put it onto a certain website or through a certain program, and it can spit out information about that picture, including GPS location. It can give you the GPS location, what time it was done, where it was done, what kind of device it was taken on, whether it was an actual camera or it was a phone. There's a bunch of information that a picture can have. So if you're going to take away anything that I'm saying from this is social media is not a bad thing. It can be used for good and staying connected with people. However, it can become dangerous when you don't pay attention to what you post. This is where privacy comes in. Having a having I think I'm still good. Okay, I'm still good. Having privacy settings in place, such as limiting the number of people you're following, and especially in your control, limiting what you share is really helpful because then not as many people are going to, again, the impact if a breach were to happen is far lower. Good job, everyone. Now, um, PI data, it's becoming more and more prevalent. It has been for the past 7 years, 7 to 8 years. The emergence of tools such as TikTok have become synonymous with the loss of privacy because everyone is really focused on posting videos now and having TikToks up. It is a really great tool to learn things quickly. I have a TikTok account where I post things about cybersecurity. However, it's again very quote unquote anonymous and very limited. It's not as widespread. When you talk to other cybersecurity professionals, they're going to say, "Oh, TikTok is bad. TikTok is not good because it steals all your information." That is very true. TikTok and social media sites do steal your information. If it's free, you're the product. Okay. That being said, Facebook has been doing the same thing. Instagram and Twitter/X have been doing the same thing. It's really no different. It's just a difference in country and a difference in language. Okay. So you might be asking me, I know some of you will say, okay, well, I'm officially now no longer going to use social media and I don't want anyone to have my information. I understand. Okay. This is not to scare you. This is just to inform you. When you learn cybersecurity, you're going to learn a lot of things about how your data can be used. Therefore, it's important for you to understand how you can protect yourself. There are a lot of tools out there that you can use. One of them is called Privacy Hawk. So Privacy Hawk is a tool where you can essentially um, take your data back. It'll show you all the places where your data has been leaked, and then it can go ahead and take that back for you. Now, it is a paid service, and I've used it in the past. However, it's up to you. I really suggest that you do your research before you pick one of these. It's not something that you have to do. You can do it manually and reach out to all the companies. However, I understand how it can be cumbersome. Okay. All right, let's carry on. Now, why did I bring this up? Why did I say PI data is so important? And why do I say you have to protect yourself online? Well, in essence, let me check the chat here. Which social media platform is more secure for using? Saida, I love that question. So the simple answer is none. The simple reason is because the less of an online footprint you have, the more secure you are, and that's just the facts. Now there are social media websites out there that have bolstered their cybersecurity, but that doesn't mean that they're not farming your data or using your data. There's a reason why when you talk about something or when you search something online, all of a sudden you see more ads for it on YouTube or whatnot. Okay. LinkedIn, that's a really good question. So LinkedIn is a professional network. It is one of the better ones. How, unfortunately, LinkedIn is sort of a necessity if you're wanting to be successful in your job hunt because a lot of companies do use LinkedIn. That might be changing with new websites coming up that don't fully require LinkedIn. I do know some cybersecurity professionals who don't have a LinkedIn at all, and they're still successful. But these are also guys who don't have a Wi-Fi enabled printer. They don't drive a car that has any electronics. They tend to be a lot more security conscious. So I would argue that LinkedIn is probably one of the better options. Now, do I trust companies like Facebook, TikTok, and Meta and Instagram to essentially have the best interest with my data? Not really. However, um, it's at least better than none. Yes, so Louise, that is a really good point. All of these companies have been hacked before. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of them have had a hack at one point in time. Now, that's one of the risks that you face in living in a technological world. Remember, the statement of it's not if you get hacked, it's when. And that's an important statement because all these companies get hacked. It just matters how they bounce back. What are the things they did in order to be more secure? Something that not a lot of news outlets talk about is they always focus on the, oh, this company got hacked, this company got hacked, this company got hacked. However, they don't talk about all the steps that the company did internally to protect itself from being hacked in the future. So I do know for a fact because I did know someone who worked at Meta around that time when it got hacked. And they said that Meta took that incredibly seriously. They took some extreme measures to protect their data. They took some extreme measures to bolster their culture of security at their organization, which I'll talk about a bit more later. But it's important to understand that it's not if you get hacked, it's when. And all of these organizations have been hacked, but a lot of them care so much about their privacy now and about their security, which is why they are investing so much in cybersecurity because the big key element nowadays in this culture is reputation. They really care about their reputation because they've seen that if a company has a bad reputation, then their financial bottom line tanks. Yep, 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 reverse phishing. What is the core value? What is the core value LinkedIn has and others don't, please? Ahmed, the core value is just that a lot of recruiters use LinkedIn to find candidates. So that's why it's such a useful tool. It is one of the only social media or social networking tools that's actually useful because it has a tangible impact on your life in the sense that it can get you a job. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, hypothetically, you wouldn't need any of those in your life, and you would still be fine. Sure, it connects you to your friends and family, but tangentially, it doesn't have an actual impact. Um, yep, Google Plus no longer exists. Great topics there. Great, great, great. Okay, so let's talk about data breaches. Now, when it comes to a data breach, I want to define it. A data breach, in essence, is a security incident where unauthorized parties or threat actors got access to sensitive data. So this is like if sensitive data was stolen, if sensitive data was leaked, if maybe it was accessed without permission. These could have been done by hackers. It could have been done by what we call insider threats. We'll talk about later. It could have been done by nation states, which is like other nations that are trying to attack other nations. There is a cyber warfare going on right now and has been going on for years between countries that are at odds, countries that are against each other, such as the US, Mexico, Iran, Israel, Ukraine, and Russia have been at it for a while. Sure, there's an actual physical war, but they're also experiencing like um a cyber war, trying to hack each other's systems, protect each other's systems. The information here they're looking for is intel. So the Ukrainians are trying to understand the Russians' attack plans, and the Russians are trying to understand the Ukraine defenses. It's all cyber related, right? So a data breach is a leak of any of that information that could potentially cause damage to either a person or an actual company or entity. Okay. Now, before we talk about Target, let's talk about the different types of data leaks and the different types of leaks that could occur. Well, one of those leaks could be something like credentials, username, and passwords. That's a very common leak that can happen. That typically happens when an organization is storing username and passwords in an unsecure way. So what happens when you're logging into any website is that you're inputting information onto their website, right? You're putting in the username and password. What it does in a millisecond is it goes to a username and password server and it checks to see if the username and password that you entered in match what they have on their servers. When they say it matches, then it goes back to your screen and allows you to log in. Now, sometimes when they store the username and password, it gets stored in plain text. It should be encrypted. When it gets stored in plain text, well, then that means any hacker who gets into those servers has access to all that information. It has access to your username, password in plain text that they can just copy and paste into that username and password website, and they're in immediately. Now, take the example of that username and password being in plain text, right? Now, replace that with all your personal information. It can be your credit card information. It could be your banking information. It could be your account number, routing number, SWIFT code. It can be personal records such as your first name, last name, date of birth, address, your child's date of birth, your spouse's date of birth, your spouse's and child's first and last name. In the US, it could be their social security number or the national insurance number. These are all examples of data types that are at risk if they experience what we call a data breach. And that is exactly what happened with Target. So this was back in 2013. But in 2013, Target experienced a really massive incident where they, excuse me, where they exposed a lot of financial information, a lot of their private data. So there were threat actors who gained access to what we call a POS system. So POS system stands for a point of sale. It's like those machines that you have when you tap your card or something, and then it allows you to pay. Well, what happened was they got access to those point of sale systems, and then they were able to collect a lot of personal information, but the most important ones were credit and debit card information, including personal details. This is a huge data breach, and Target went through the ringer with this. They were really, really deeply affected because 41 million credit and debit cards were exposed. They found out later that this count was more or less lower than what was actually exposed due to like what was actually put out there on the dark web. So when that happened, Target took a lot of different steps. Well, the first step is they had to face the legal and financial repercussions of having that data loss. Because when you lose that data, you get hit financially, you get hit legally, and you get hit reputationally. Keep in mind, this was 10 years ago. As of today, most people have forgotten that Target had a data breach because time moves on, right? However, the company does not. I guarantee you that the cybersecurity teams at Target are still talking about the data breach that happened in 2010 or 2013 and how they have systems in place to protect it. So what they did is they bolstered their security around their POS systems. They included some major network segmentation. They made sure to add major layers of encryption, and they essentially took plenty of steps to protect their data more. Okay. All right. So are security and data breaches the same? Now, we need to define these because, as a reminder, a data breach is essentially when sensitive data is stolen, it's leaked, it's accessed without permission. That's what a data breach is, okay? And it can be by a hacker, nation state, whoever. Now, a security breach, in essence, is somewhat similar, but there's a key difference. It's an incident where systems or devices are accessed without permission. However, data isn't stolen, data isn't put out there, okay? There's maybe just a disruption in service. If you remember, I talked about one of the security attacks or security attacks that exists out that's really common called a DDoS attack. That stands for a denial of service, distributed denial of service attack. So that's when you're just not, you're affecting the availability of a system. A security breach is essentially impacting the system, rendering it unusable, but potentially not stealing or not accessing private data. That's the key difference. Data breach is when you access and leak private data. A security breach is when you just impact a system but don't extract or impact any personal data in and of itself. Okay? Now you might be wondering, well, why would a threat actor or why would someone try to cause a security breach as opposed to a data breach? Wouldn't a data breach be more effective? Wouldn't a data breach be more advantageous financially? Well, that is a really good question. The main reason can be a multitude of factors, primarily because threat actors and hackers and groups out there, they fit into multiple different categories, which we'll learn later on in class. But in short, sometimes threat actors attack businesses just due to ethical concerns or moral dilemmas. There are groups there that we call hacktivists. So hacktivists, such as a hacking group called Anonymous, if you're unfamiliar with Anonymous, I suggest that you look them up because they are a very well-known hacktivist group, meaning that they're activists centered around hacking for a cause. And that cause can be whatever they care about. And they're not the only ones. There are a lot of hacktivist groups out there. That's one of the reasons why they want to do a security breach and not a data breach, because more often than not, hacktivist groups tend to think that they have the moral high ground, that they have a moral compass. They don't want to access or alter or steal your personal data, but they do want to make companies, organizations, people that they deem don't fit their moral code to pay for the discretions that they may have. And this can be whatever reason. It could be because they're a vegan hacktivist group. It could be because they care about a certain political group or what have you. There are a lot of different reasons why they would do that, which is why it's not always about data breaches. At times, it's about sending a message. This is a real thing. Hacktivists want to send a message to a certain individual or a group by saying, we can hack your organization whenever we want. An example of this is a hacktivist group can hack an organization's website and change the content of their website to say whatever they want. This is something called a defacement attack. This is where they change the website. Instead of saying, we save the planet, they'll change it to, we ruin the planet by releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere, or we ruin the planet by using a lot more plastic bottles or something like that. Okay. It's essentially changing the website. It's to send a message overall. So that's why that happens. Um, we can ignore this use case for now because I want to stick with the example that I gave here. Okay. Let me check the chat so I can answer some questions. I'm more careful through cybersecurity after having bad experiences. Yep, Pardeep, you're absolutely correct. The smart companies have taken a lot better care and a lot better steps in protecting their organization and their security best practices because of these instances. When companies ask for your email, for example, how we did today can win $100. What are they doing with the emails? Peter, I love that question. Okay. I will answer it in layman terms. You're welcome, Pardeep. So when a company is asking for your email saying, hey, how do we do today with our service? So, more often than not, these tend to be quote unquote legitimate. Now, there is a reason why they're asking for your email. The reason why they're asking for your email is so that they can store your email and send you marketing information later on. That's the primary purpose. Yes, they want to get feedback, but they care more about your data. You have to understand. Data is power. Data equals money. When you have someone's data, you can send them emails. When you send them emails, that's a marketing email, maybe with a product that they like, they might buy from you. That's the entire goal of marketing. That's why marketing is all about getting that one email that connects you as a person, an individual, to that brand so you can make those purchases. Um, there are when you ask can win $100 gift card. So it depends. Typically, when you are getting an email that is A, out of the blue that you're not expecting, B, that has a sense of urgency saying, hey, you need to click on this link right now if you want to win XYZ, right? Those anything that you need to do quickly or anything that's asking you to do it quickly, more often than not is a phishing email. And then especially something if you aren't expecting it. So Mary is definitely on the ball there. Yep, Trey is also correct. They sell your information. Um, so here's the thing, Saida. When it comes to banks and insurance companies, you have to trust your insurance company. You have to trust your bank. More often than not, you need to make sure that it's an established business, that it actually is an operating one. A very simple example. So here, let's go to Charles Schwab. So Charles Schwab is a very known financial institution, right? If you're ever curious or wondering about a company's legitimacy, well, then one of the first things you can do, a very small thing, is you go to the upper left-hand corner of that company. You click on it and you check to see if the connection is secure. Now, this is becoming more and more quote unquote less reliable, but more often than not, it's a good way to check because here you can see whether the connection is secure or not. Okay, then it gives you information on if it's secure. If it says certificate is valid, that means that they are legitimate in the website at the very least. And you'll know when a company is not legitimate because it doesn't have all the signs of a good company. Like maybe it doesn't have all this information, doesn't have an about us section, and it's just use your gut. If you feel like your gut is telling you it's not true, then it most likely isn't. Mm. Yep, marketing purposes, like we said, sell your data. Yep, email marketing. Yep. Yep, Ahmed, you're absolutely right. Hacktivists are motivated by political and social goals. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to go ahead and talk about the importance of privacy and cybersecurity. I want you to start thinking about that. But for now, I'm going to pause and give everyone 15 minutes. So, Ramzi, if we can go.
I hope you had a break, a snack, and you're ready. We have a winner. So, did anybody get the right answer? Let's see. If you did, just raise a hand or give us a notification. Okay, for the second part of today's session, we're gonna cover the material, and then in the last 15 minutes, almost, we're gonna spend 5 minutes for the Zoom poll, and then uh, if you would like Andre to do a Kahoot, we can also do a Kahoot in the end. I leave the choice up to you. So the floor is all yours. Please lead us in the second part, Andre. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ramzi. All right, everyone. Before we move forward, Keith, thank you for that little bit of knowledge there. So that is accurate. So the reason why I always say that the entire goal of cybersecurity is to protect human life, because if you did your homework with the Stuxnet worm incident, um, then you'll have learned that they got access to actual energy grids that were able to overheat or over accelerate different centrifuges. Now, those centrifuges had physical reactions. Those physical reactions caused physical damage. In essence, it could have taken lives. So when we talk about cybersecurity and protecting human life, that's what we mean. Because think of it this way. When you're trying to hack, if you're a threat actor, you can hack almost anything. And the more our lives are becoming technically dependent on technology, well, then the more we're putting our lives in the hands of technology. A very simple but classic example is Google Maps. So right now, I know a lot of people use Google Maps in order to find a destination to where they're going, whether that is to a restaurant or whether that's to a specific town or what have you. Imagine that Google did not have all of the good cybersecurity controls that they have, and a threat actor was able to take control of your Google Maps session. Meaning, when you're trying to get directions to a specific restaurant, it will redirect you, still saying, hey, you're going to that restaurant, but it may redirect you to a hazardous location, potentially a location where a threat actor can actually take control of your phone or of you or what have you. That is an extreme case, but it's an example of what can happen if technology gets hacked and it could impact your life. A more common one that is now becoming really, really, in my opinion, something that we all need to be wary of are fully electronic cars, fully computerized cars. I don't know if you're aware, but Elon Musk has a kill switch for different Teslas, meaning he can turn off any Tesla wherever he wants. He can turn on the camera on any Tesla that he wants. And so that to me is dangerous because that means if there's that kill switch, if someone can hack Tesla, well, then they can turn off the car, they can speed up the car, they can essentially have huge ramifications on someone's life about with that car. So let me kind of dive into that a little more because this jumps directly into our topic. There is a movie out there that's called Upgrade, and it is a movie that was released in 2018. However, it does talk about some very specific scientific or cyber secure um, things that happen and talking about privacy and control. Now, it is not for everyone. It is a rated R movie, so I highly suggest you don't watch it with your kids. However, if you want to learn more about some real life examples of the impacts of privacy, I suggest you do check that out. Hmm. Louise, I see your request for me to talk about Cambridge Analytica. Unfortunately, I can't talk about that too much because I am trying to stay away from talking intensively about very, very divisive and politically charged things. We have a broad array of people here, so instead, I would just say you can research that for sure. Yeah, Brian, I see what you're saying. There are costs, there are pros and cons to everything, especially in cybersecurity as well. There are pros and cons to having electric cars, and then there are pros and cons to not having electric cars. The key thing here is less about the electric itself, but more around the control. If there was a company that built electric cars sustainably, as well as gave full control of the vehicle, and it was not connected to a network at all, that is more safe, in my opinion. The problem is companies won't do that because companies care about control. And when they have control, they have more financial resources. An example, BMW I don't know if this is still the case, but the last I heard, they were trying to sell features as a service, meaning you will only have access to your high beams if you're paying a monthly subscription fee. So this is an example of companies wanting to make more money off of features. Now, they can turn that feature on and off, but they need a network connection to do so. So this is an example of another case of privacy. When you purchase something, you should be able to own it outright. Let me see here. Sonny asks, can someone hack your CCTV and your smart TV? Yes, it is doable. There are tools out there that enable you to do it. Something as simple as doing a network scan, and you can just look it up. What tools are there to be able to hack a CCTV or a smart TV? Those do exist. Now, I'm not going to tell you what specifically those are, but you will learn them down the line. All right. Let's talk about the importance of privacy and cybersecurity today. Now, I already talked about this in depth when we talked about social media, when we talked about why it's important and why a lot of companies are trying to protect our data. The reason why the government is also stepping in and creating regulations to protect our data and our privacy is because they have a vested interest in us keeping our data secure. I think that a big reason why TikTok was unbanned from the United States was because they saw that all the Americans were freely giving their data and their information to another app called RedNote. And RedNote is a social media app that is tied to China, but there are rumors that it is potentially tied to a Chinese government website. Now, if you're not aware, the Chinese government has a really strong stance on monitoring a lot of social media networks. So they have a vested interest in everyone's private information. Now, that is just alleged. It is not a fact. However, it is important to note that the government did pay attention to that and they want the data of Americans specifically to stay in America. That's why TikTok was such a huge, huge deal. Now, the importance of privacy and cybersecurity is that it's centered around your personal information. Protecting your personal information through technology is the key to having a more secure organization, having a more secure industry overall. Why does this matter? Well, when you have smart devices such as phones, when you have tablets, when you have wearable technology such as smartwatches and whatnot, your private habits, your private data is being collected. It's being collected, it's being stored, and sometimes it is being sold. And when it's being sold, sometimes it's being sold without clear consent. That huge line of text that you just scroll through and click accept to have an account on Instagram or have an account with Apple, or when you're setting up a new watch or a new phone, somewhere in those terms of service, there is somewhere saying that we will collect your information and we may sell it to a third party for whatever reason. Here is how you can take your power back. And this is where we can benefit from AI. Right now, there are AI tools that are emerging that are helping you understand what those terms and conditions are saying. They help you understand what exactly you're signing away. What you can do is you can look up those terms and services, copy and paste it, or save it as a PDF, upload it into ChatGPT, and ask it to give you all the data points that it's taking and where it's storing the information and where it's selling it. This is all about being aware of where your data goes and how important it is, okay? Now, another piece of why this is important, I already mentioned, is because of capitalism. So capitalism, like I said before, is centered around data. Data is power and data is money. Companies profit from tracking your behavior online. When they track your behavior, they learn your interests, what you like, and then in turn, they can target you for certain marketing campaigns, which will then make them money. So the entire idea around capitalism is that the more information and data we have, the more we can target you to make more money. Finally, there's the concept of privacy. So in the UK specifically, you have a very important act that I want you to look up. So not only do you have GDPR, but you have something called a right to privacy. A right to privacy, it means that it is protected under the Human Rights Act of 1998. and then there's something called Article 8 that you want to look up. This just means that you, as a private citizen or a consumer, have the right to your privacy. So organizations owe it to you as a consumer to protect your data. GDPR helps bolster that and gives the power back to you to be able to say, hey, I want you to delete all my information. This is important because, believe it or not, you expect companies to adhere to their compliance standards and to delete your data when you tell them to. But sometimes they're too busy making a profit to actually do that. A very simple example. When it comes to email marketing, if you go to an email, let's say you subscribe to a newsletter and you click unsubscribe, that a good company should have a mechanism in place that automatically unsubscribes you. I used to work for an email marketing company. I know the behind the scenes of what happens when someone clicks unsubscribe. There are companies out there that don't care if you unsubscribed or not. They will keep emailing you until you complain or until you mark them as spam. When you mark them as spam, well, then it'll be reported to their domain registry, and then it hits them a little bit. Now, they have methods to go around that. However, this is just an example to say not all companies have the best interest, your best interest at heart when it comes to protecting your data. So it's better to be cautious and request that data to be deleted. All right, let's move on here. Let's talk a little bit about privacy, and let's talk about why privacy matters. Now, I think I've kind of zeroed in on why privacy is so important, but one of the best ways that we can encapsulate this is listening to Glenn Greenwald's TED Talk. Okay. Now, we're not going to listen to the whole thing because it is fairly long. Also, because you all have been so interactive in this class, I'm going to show you all a little trick. So right there, you saw an ad, right? Well, I'm going to show you a really great browser. So there is a browser called the Brave browser. And in that Brave browser, you can do the same thing and watch videos that don't have ads. So how is this possible? Well, this is possible because the Brave browser is essentially a Chrome-based browser. However, it has built-in ad blocks into it, okay? Now, this is publicly available information. This isn't quote unquote new, but I wanted to point that out to you. You all can check out this video later on because it is 20 minutes long. So just wanted to point that one out. Let me just take a moment to see the chat here. So, Sylvester, I see what you said. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity and your privacy, if you live in the UK, you can do two things. You can report them as spam, or you can reach out to them and say, please delete all of my data and cease all communication according to GDPR guidelines. When they delete your information, that means they can't reach out to you anymore. All right, let me see here. I see what Pardeep says. Yep, when personal data is ever, it's everyone. Yep, therefore it's very important to keep personal. Yep, good job, Pradeep. That is absolutely correct. I have a question about antivirus. For example, I have Norton installed. It scans my QA every day and also makes backup every day. Where does my data go and can I trust it? Yeah, Norton is a really good example of a good antivirus. Depending on who you speak to, there are always going to be some people that say that Norton virus is a honeypot and whatnot, but it's better to have an antivirus than not have one. So you can ask Norton, you can reach out to them and be like, hey, where does my data go? Right? But they're pretty well trusted. Um, Prakesh, I see your question. The short answer is yes. There are capabilities to hack all CCTVs to be able to track someone. There's even facial recognition. The tools that we have right now that have facial recognition on our phones, chances are that facial recognition is being used in order to track other people. If iPhone has it, I guarantee you that the government has something 3 times more powerful. If you watch the movie Snowden, like I suggested, there are some things on there that are similar. How cyber threat actors create valid monetary accounts. You'll have to expand on that one a little bit, and I'll let the TA answer that. Is it true any picture or video you post on social media that they own it based on those agreements you agree to use all rights to your content? Yeah, that is pretty much true. That means that they store all that information, and unless you make a formal request to delete it, well then it's theirs. Now they could potentially as laws potentially change, it could be deleted, but we don't really know. I see a lot of questions here. I love how engaged you all are about this. This is really awesome. Opera GX, Brandon, I can't say I've worked with that one too much. Brian, that is a good sign that London is saying, hey, just so you know, these are here. The movies that I mentioned are Snowden and Upgrade. Snowden and Upgrade are two really good examples. There's also a new movie that came out that it's called The Amateur. It's a lot more action oriented. However, it does kind of give some elements of cybersecurity. Okay, let's go ahead and carry on because we have a couple more slides we need to go through. So we already talked about why privacy matters. When you watch that TED Talk from Glenn Woodall, he really goes into a lot more of the intricacies of cybersecurity and why that matters. Now, we are going to talk about a very specific individual. His name is Edward Snowden. So Edward Snowden, and if you've never heard his name before, it's very important to understand because he literally changed the face of cybersecurity and privacy. The reason why is because Edward Snowden was a CIA and NSA contractor. So as you can imagine, the CIA and the NSA in the United States hold a lot of information and a lot of data privacy. Now, he used to be a contractor with them, and what he did was he was able to get access to a lot of classified information, and he leaked all of those documents about like 12 years ago. Now, when he leaked all of those documents, it released and revealed a lot of very damning information from the US government. It was saying that the US and the UK government were doing mass surveillance on all of their citizens. Now, both governments said that it was for national security and they were doing it to keep track of certain individuals. However, it was proven that it wasn't exactly the case. So, in short, when you all were asking, are there ways that CCTVs and cameras and smart TVs can be hacked? Yeah, that is exactly what we're talking about here. Edward Snowden brought up that there are tools and programs out there that enable you to see all that information. When you actually watch the movie Snowden, which the movie Snowden, it is pretty much a pretty accurate depiction of what exactly happened. Now, of course, it is a movie, so it does dramatize a couple things. But one of the things that is true is regarding to some of the tools that the government has. Now, the government has access to two tools in particular. One of them is called Prism, and the other one is called X Keyscore. So both of these, they look like normal little tools that you would have anywhere, right? However, they have the power to access all emails, chat logs, video files, live camera feeds, your computer camera feed. If you ever wonder why cybersecurity professionals have this little thing on here, so as you can see, I have a little cover for my camera, right? Most cybersecurity professionals have that because they know that there is a capability to turn on your camera and to see your camera from anywhere. And this is not just when your computer is on. It's also when your computer is off too. There are programs like that that do exist. I have seen it. I can't say I've used it, but I've seen my coworkers use it, and it's pretty fascinating to see its capabilities. If we as hackers have that, the government has something a lot more powerful. So why this is important is because you might be asking, well, where does that information come from? How are they using or how are they collecting all of that data in order to feed all this information? Well, it comes mainly from several sources, and that's all of the free apps, all of the free um, applications that you're using. Facebook, Apple, Google. These are all places that collect so much of your information, but you get to use the services for free, specifically Facebook and Google, right? Because you don't need to pay anything to use their sites. But what you're paying for it with is your privacy. So all of this data gets put into these systems like Prism and X key score so that it can feed their information so they better understand you. Okay. Now, however you feel about the fact that Edward Snowden was able to steal the information, whether you view him as a hero or a villain, one thing is important to note. At the end of the day, he did break the law and he did become what we call an insider threat. So an insider threat is someone who violates the confidentiality of the CIA triad. Remember, the CIA triad stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. When an insider threat steals data and leaks it, he takes away the confidentiality of an organization. He did leak vulnerable information. He did leak information that was damaging to the United States. And dare I say, he leaked information that did put some people's lives in danger. You have to keep in mind that national security is a real thing in cybersecurity. And what Edward Snowden did was he leaked that information. So an insider threat is when a person inside an organization has a change of heart for whatever reason and then misuses their access. They intentionally or maliciously decide to leak data. Now, keep this in mind. Edward Snowden did this deliberately. He did this intentionally with the goal to inform the public on what the governments were doing, spying on their own citizens. That being said, sometimes an insider threat could be unintentional. An example of an unintentional insider threat is if you are working at a company and you have access to a bunch of email addresses, and then you send an email with a file of all the email addresses and you send it to another company. Well, that's an example of an insider threat because you unintentionally breach the confidentiality of your data. That's when you email someone by accident a whole bunch of information. Sure, it's an accident, but it's still considered an insider threat and it's still considered an incident or a data breach. So you have to have mechanisms in place to protect that. More often than not, we've become sophisticated enough now in technology where we can have callbacks or recalls where if we send an email within 15 minutes or within a certain amount of time, you can click recall that email and it will recall an email that was sent so that no one would have seen it. Okay. Now, that's one of the that's one of the options out there. The other option is having safeguards and technical controls that if they see that you're trying to send a large file with very specific PII data, well, then it'll prevent you from sending that file. It'll flag it. And then sometimes someone will see it and then they'll say, okay, we can't send that email. We need to flag that for now. That kind of stuff. All right. We already talked about insider threats. We talked a little bit more about Snowden. Let me check the everyone's being what's considered a secure browser that doesn't track your information. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. So, Louise, that's a good question. Wayne, I see you saying that Tor is an option. So that is true. Tor is an option. However, if you download and use Tor, well, then you will get flagged by your internet service provider. They'll say, okay, this person is using Tor. So you will be on someone's radar. Something else to note, Oibek is completely right that an open source one is one of the best options. Even Brave is not like a um, fully quote unquote safe one. It is privacy focused, but if a government agency really wanted to, they could still track you. Um, yeah. How Julian Assange was so successful in getting a bunch of classified documents if related to our topic. Sure, I can talk about that. So the benefit of Julian Assange is that and keep in mind here, I am not praising or demonizing any of these people like Snowden and Assange and whatnot. I will say that Assange is someone who's very pro free speech. It is a double-edged sword, but the way he was able to collect all of that information is literally through what they call privacy champions. Privacy champions are people who believe in the ultimate goal that all individuals should be the sole controllers of their own privacy, that the government should have zero insight into any individuals. Their lives would be ideal if the government didn't know where they were, what they did at all times, what their preferences were, what kind of phone they have, that the government only has the bare necessity information to use and operate the government. Okay, that's it. So what they'll do is these are insider threats who leak the information to Julian Assange via different mediums. That's one of the prime ways that he gets his information. Um, I see what you posted there, Jurgis. I'll let you all look into that a bit more. Okay. I see people talking about ethics. We will talk about ethics a bit more today. So Sylvester talks about saving your passwords on your browser. Yes, that is accurate. You don't want to save your password on your browser. However, when you are using a password management tool, it still does the same thing as saving a password on your browser. I won't show you that entire hacking process right now. Can you still be monitored through the camera without your sensors showing that the camera is on? Yes. Yeah, you can. Can you do Kahoot at the end of session as this class is last this week? Yes, we will be doing the Kahoot. You can look it up. You can look up what were their security. Actually, if you go to perplexity.ai, you can ask, give me in bullet points what exactly Edward Snowden leaked about the US government. Make it a simple answer. So here it's the PRISM program that I had mentioned before. So the PRISM program, it allowed them to access data from major companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all that. Global surveillance network. So what they're saying here is that NSA and their allies had a huge tool that enabled them to have global surveillance, including tapping into undersea cables and spying on foreign governments, X keystroke that I had mentioned before, analyzing internet activity, hacking operations. It's all out there. And now the reason why I like using Perplexity is because it gives you sources on each location, on each one, so you can dig into it more. So that's what I encourage you to check out. Who asked that question? Hamed. And then Jignesh brings up Mr. Robot. Yes, Mr. Robot, especially like the first couple episodes are real. He actually uses real commands and real terminal commands and whatnot. However, it does start to taper off later on. Nope, Perplexity is fully free. You can pay for it, but it is fully free. I love all the questions that you all are asking. This is great. I can tell that some of you are going to become great privacy policy or privacy ambassadors. Okay. So we talked about Snowden, and one of the key things I want you to remember here is however you feel about what Snowden did, there is a lack of security when it comes to insider threat. When you watch the movie, you'll see that he was able to extrapolate or push out the data using a Rubik's Cube. Now, that's not factually accurate. The one that he actually uses in the movie didn't come out until 2014, and he took out all the information in 2013. Now, what is still true though is that he was an insider threat. He did have access to confidential data and confidential information that shouldn't have gone out. Now, whether he leaked that information for the well-being of others or not, that is morality and that's an ethics question, which we'll talk about. But thing is true. He is what we call a whistleblower. A whistleblower is someone who exposes wrongdoings or abuse by an organization. More often than not, a whistleblower becomes punished. So what happened to Edward Snowden is that he leaked all the information to a journalist, and the movie describes this. And then when he leaked all the information to the journalist, he gave interviews and whatnot. At the end of the day, he tried leaving the United States because he feared for his life. But when he landed, he was trying to go to Latin America. But or I forget which country he was trying to go to, but he got stuck in Russia because the United States canceled his passport. They didn't allow him to travel. However, he turned that around. Now, believe it or not, he actually was given residency in Russia that was extended year after year by Vladimir Putin. And then now he was given Russian citizenship. So now he has a Russian passport, fully lives in Russia. Now, the US did try to extradite him. They tried to take steps to bring him back and bring him to justice. However, of course, because it's Russia and the Russia and the United States have animosity or whatnot, he opted to stay in Russia. Now he has a wife, two kids. His wife was American. They show that in the movie. She moved to Russia with him, and then now they're married since 2017. They have two kids, fully living in Russia. Now, this is what we call a whistleblower. In this case, he is quote unquote still safe. However, other whistleblowers are not as fortunate. The key elements here to remember is that insider threats are real. Insider threats are real in the sense that if an employee is disgruntled enough or if they're given enough of a motivation, then they will strike back at the organization. This is why it's so incredibly important for an organization to have a solid and secure culture. That solid and secure culture promotes professionalism, promotes ethics, promotes security. When you put that in the culture, it reinforces good behavior from employees and reinforces the ethical practice of security. Releasing confidential information is not ethical. It becomes muddy depending on what that confidential information is. But in essence, if you're looking at it from an employee standpoint, it is unethical and you are being an insider threat. Now, that being said, let's kind of shift gears a little bit. So there is something, we're going to shift to a more technical standpoint. There is something called deception and disruption in technology. So what we mean by deception and disruption is if, let's say, a hacker gets into your network, you can deceive the hacker into like not stealing the actual information, but stealing what we call quasi information. This is what we call a honeynet. A honeynet is essentially a full network of fake systems that says, hey, we store all our passwords here. All of our credit card information is here in plain text. Okay, these are all examples. It's like a network of fake information. The most common term that you'll hear inside cybersecurity when it comes to decoys and deception and disruption to hackers is a honeypot. A honeypot, in very simple terms, is a fake system or a fake file that looks attractive to hackers. It can be a file that says something as simple as passwords. It can be a network or a file server that says credit card information or sensitive data. That's one that I've seen before, is we say all sensitive data is the name of a server. The entire idea with a honeypot is it's a decoy system that takes the attention of the hackers away from the actual sensitive information and into the honeypot. When an attacker gets into the honeypot, well, then we can actually watch their movements and quote unquote reverse hack them. Now, this isn't a full reverse hack because most hackers, they tend to use things like proxies. Proxies are systems and tools that will misdirect anyone who's trying to find them. So if you try to reverse search someone, more often than not, they'll use multiple proxy servers, reverse proxy servers, VPNs. Maybe they'll pretend like they're trying to check your location from an external IP address, that kind of stuff. If you watch the movie The Amateur, it has a split-second scene where they're trying to reverse search someone, and then that someone is using proxy servers to quote unquote hide themselves, but eventually they find them. So a honeypot is essentially a decoy server in order to learn more about what the attacker is doing. And then there's a honeynet. A honeynet is just a network of honeypots. That means if a honeypot is one server, a honeynet is a bunch of fake servers who are trying to understand what the hacker is looking for. It tries to mimic a real network production environment. So if you had like a web server and a database server, maybe like a point of sale server, all of those could be fake servers with the idea to understand what the hacker is actually after. Similarly, there's something called a honeyfile. So if a honeypot is a server, within the server, it has honeyfiles. So these are fake decoys. It could be as simple as a Google Doc, or sorry, not a Google Doc, but a Word document that says these are all of our usernames and passwords. The idea here is that it can leave breadcrumbs leading the attacker to go to a specific location. Why are these important? Because all of these are essentially taking the hacker away from the real data that they're trying to steal and sending them on a wild goose chase. But that wild goose chase is one that we can track. We can see what the hacker is interested in. There are some honeypots where the hacker isn't interested in the username and password at all. They're not interested in the whatchamacallit, in the credit cards at all. There was one instance I remember where we gave the hacker a honeypot, and they weren't interested in money. They weren't interested in username and passwords. They kept on searching for one specific person, and it was a director of a specific department. We learned later on that that director of that department had very specific political views, and that threat actor was a hacktivist trying to target that one individual. So this is an example to show you that threat actors aren't purely after passwords and money. They are sometimes motivated by external factors, such as hacktivism or for a specific reason or motion. And then there's something called a honey token. So a honey token is essentially a honey file, except it's a set of fake data and specifically fake credentials. Okay, they're intentionally placed there to be like so that the hacktivist will say, or the hacker will say, yes, that's what I want. That's the intentional thing I'm looking for. And the idea here is we can then detect unauthorized access because they will try to use the credentials on a specific website. When they use specific credentials, it'll flag them so that we know where they're trying to use them and why. So this is great because it acts as an early warning system so that any system they try to log into, that system can say, hey, these were honey tokens. Keep track of this person's IP address so you can block them and any associated IP addresses related to it. So this is the concept of deception. So we're trying to um, deceive the hacker from getting the actual real data. Then there's something called disruption technology. So disruption is very simple. Disruption is just the process of interrupting or misleading the attacker. That means when they're doing an attack, if we don't disrupt them, they keep attacking. If we disrupt them and stop them on their tracks, that means that we've disrupted them and we've interrupted their hacking process. A very simple way to think about this is something called an IPS. So an IPS is called an intrusion prevention system. An intrusion prevention system is a disruption tool. That means that it stops the hacker in its tracks. There are different network technologies and different systems out there that exist that stop an intrusion or a hack from taking place. That's why it's called a disruption technology. The idea here, excuse me, the idea here is that if you have an IPS in place, so an intrusion prevention system, well, then it can stop an attack from happening by taking several steps. The first thing that it does is it enables you to do early detection. When it detects that it's happening, well, then because it's intrusion prevention, it actively stops it. It takes certain steps to actually stop it. More often than not, it will either shut down that entire network, or it might quarantine it off, or it might make note of the IP address that the attacker is attacking from, and then it might block that IP address. Sometimes it may still allow that IP address to roam around the network as long as it can pick up and learn from what the hacker is trying to do. So you might be asking, okay, well, we have a methodology to deceive the attacker using a Honeynet or Honeytokens, essentially like giving them fake information. And then we have a way to disrupt them. Well, what's the main reasons? For one, it's to understand the hacker behavior. So we want to understand what exactly they're trying to do and why, and that might help us understand why and then what we need to protect down the line. And then it's also diverting their attention. This is really important. When we move their attention away from the real data, that protects the organization overall. And then there's reducing risk, because when we deceive them or when we disrupt them, it reduces the risk of an actual incident taking place. And then adaptive defense, that just means strengthening our defenses, making sure we know, okay, they're targeting this specific person or these specific things. These are the ways that we can protect against it. Okay. One of you mentioned ethics inside of the chat that we're talking about. Now, like I mentioned before, we want to build cybersecurity into the business. So that means that we need to make sure that there is an element of ethics, or quote unquote doing the right thing. Ethics stands for knowing the difference between right and wrong and choosing to act responsibly, doing the right thing and acting honestly. This is important because you may think, oh, cybersecurity is all about tech. Again, the entire goal here is to help you understand it's broader than that. Cybersecurity is humanistic in nature. The right thing for us to do as cybersecurity professionals is to protect human life. That is our goal. That is our duty. So ethics means that we need to do the right thing. When it comes to ethics in companies and different organizations, ethics is meant to govern a person's behavior and how they conduct themselves. By conducting themselves, we're not talking about controlling people. We're just speaking to their humanity. We're speaking to their ability to be ethical and make ethical decisions. This is as simple as not using the same username and password for multiple different websites, especially on a work computer. It can be as simple as protecting someone's privacy. It is not sharing a username and password with other employees. A very simple one that I'm sure no one here would do is, if you see credit card information from a customer or a client, not taking a picture of that credit card information and using it for your own gain, because those are all considered unethical and morally unsound practices. This is why professionalism is so important. A part of professionalism is being ethically sound and having ethically good morals. Something that I want to make sure everyone understands is that when it comes to getting a job, companies right now, yes, it is important to be technical. However, I have seen companies hire people that weren't as technical because they have strong moral character. They have strong ethics. They do the right thing. Because sometimes you can't teach being a morally and ethically good person. You can't teach that. That just has to come from you, which is why I love cybersecurity in the sense that it's holistic. It's not just about the technology, it's about you being a good person. You are going to become the good guy that's going to be battling against the bad guys. So you have to have the right ethics in place in order to do that job well. That means making sure that you're being honest, making sure that you're being transparent, making sure that when you're using data or when you're processing information, you're doing it securely. That means not emailing yourself documents and information about your patients or your customers. That means acting with integrity. This is really important because not only do you have to do that as a cybersecurity professional, but organizations have to do it too. It is no secret that some organizations are not ethically sound. They don't protect your data enough. Like someone said, they don't unsubscribe you from an email newsletter. That's unethical because when they say, hey, when you unsubscribe, we remove you, right? There are a bunch of ways that companies can be unethical, but you need to incorporate ethics properly in order to have a really good cyber secure positioning. So, what are some trends right now that are increasing the concept of unethicalness? Well, in very simple terms, because we're moving so fast in the cybersecurity landscape and the technology landscape, AI has played a part in being unethical. What that means is because of the rapid advancements, people are cutting corners. What I mean by cutting corners is they're skipping the proper processes to meet the guidelines. So that means maybe they have a project where they have to build a certain product. Well, this has happened so many times in my career where a product will be built and it will accomplish the goal, but it accomplishes it unsecurely. When you accomplish a goal unsecurely and people are trusting your application, they're giving you their data. They don't know that they're giving their data to a product that is unsecure, meaning if you get hacked, well, then their data is lost. They have a data breach. So a piece of being ethical is doing things the right way, even if it's time consuming and even if it's hard, because then you're doing right by the people who are giving you their data. So that's one of the difficult things is like the advancement in technology means they're cutting corners. That can also be pressured by leadership. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to work for a company that has leadership that you trust and strong leadership, because they're going to pressure you to meet a deadline. When you want to meet a deadline, sometimes you want to cut corners. And then there's a lack of clear regulation. So with AI, there's no clear regulation on its fair use yet. Like, luckily, the actors were adamant saying that you can't use our likeness for future movies because that was really headed in that direction. The same way that AI is being misused today. So things such as deep fakes, fake voices, fake videos, fake profiles, that kind of stuff. And then there's also unethical reporting. So sometimes there are companies that go through audits, but they pay the auditing companies to make them look better. So to just say it bluntly, they lie about their auditing reports. When they lie about the auditing reports, it makes them look good to leadership and to regulators, and they give a false sense of safety. Now, this I would like to say is rare, but I've never come across it because I pride myself in working with very reputable companies. However, there are regulators and auditors out there that'll fudge the numbers that'll make things look a little better than they actually are because they're trying to, maybe they're being incentivized by bribes or whatnot. That is unethical in its full entirety. So Ethics is really important to cybersecurity because you need to be an ethical person that has integrity to do the right thing, to protect data, to protect privacy. This is one of the reasons why I care about this so much, is because privacy is not just for everyone, it's meant for organizations and companies as well. All right. So how can you apply ethics in how can you apply ethics, or how can you essentially build it into your culture? I think we already talked about it in depth. I also, something else to note is that you want to think long term. So not just thinking, hey, we have this product, let's go ahead and release it. No, we also want to make sure that we're building the product for long term. We also want to understand that our decisions are going to impact stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, it's not just investors and leadership, it's also our end customers. We also want to have personal values. So one of the first things I do when I'm considering working for a company is I look on their website to see if they have company values. If they have company values, that means to me that they have a moral compass. Having values is a very small and low effort thing to do to display that you're a company that cares. You're a company that actually does the talk. And then regularly reviewing your decisions, it means doing an impact analysis to understand what happens if you make these decisions. What are the repercussions? And I think we already talked about this a little bit. Let me just double check. Okay, we're good. We're on the right path here. So other ways that you can do this is you want to make sure you build this into your culture. So what do I mean by build this into your culture? That means you need to have a clear code of ethics. You need to clearly state and define what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Not just behavior as in like being professional, but actually terms of use. So there is a policy out there that is called the AOU, that stands for Acceptable Use Policy, or sorry, AUP, Acceptable Use Policy, and it's in reference to your computer. It means when you're given a work computer, these are the ways that you can use the work computer, and these are ways that you cannot use it. Essentially stating these are the acceptable ways you can use it, and these are unacceptable ways. The idea here is to act with ethics and integrity and only using your computer for work. Of course, some people bend that, but the entire essence here is that you use your given laptops that was given to you by the company in a way that protects the company as well. Training and awareness is really important. This is one of the primary reasons why I do what I do. I teach because I want others to understand the importance of cybersecurity, and I want to educate other people to know why it's so important to be secure. Encourage open communication. This has to come from top down. Your leaders have to not be afraid of feedback and have to not be afraid of receiving communication. They have to be open to communication, because when you're open to communication, you're fostering trust and you're fostering transparency. There are levels to that, but the idea here is to be open to receiving information, especially reports. When you open up conversation, well, then employees feel comfortable reporting unethical behavior, especially reporting unethical behavior when they're afraid that they might be penalized or they might be punished for whatever reason. Having that open communication is really important in culture. Leadership has to lead by example, and doing regular audits is also really important, because when you do those audits, you're essentially ensuring that you're doing what's right and that you're adhering to very specific standards. We already talked about professionalism at work. We already talked about this is specifically to IT workers. Now, this encouraging professional development. So this is a way to build trust and foster care. It's showing that you care about the individuals and they're not just people that clock in from 8 to 5 and then do a certain job and then they go home. When you pour into them, well, then they feel like they have some form of ownership to the company and to the product. When they do that, they're more likely to act with ethics. Ethics is important because, like I said, it has to come from top down. leaders have to lead by example, and then when they lead by example, others will follow in their footsteps. You'll know that someone is a great leader when their entire team follows them like very loyally. A culture of responsibility. This can also be synonymous with taking ownership and taking accountability. That means if you did something wrong, say it. If someone is doing something that you don't think is right, say it. It means owning up, extreme ownership. Certifications and memberships. This is similar to professional development. Recognition and rewards for ethical practices. So this is another way to recognize and reward people that are doing things well, people that are speaking up. It's important because, like I said, cybersecurity is humanistic in nature. Now, the reason why ethics is so important is because ethics is tied to cybersecurity and privacy. Privacy is about protecting data and protecting information that should be kept confidential. So because we're trying to keep information kept confidential, we need to make sure that there are the right tools, that we have the right policies and controls in place to protect that information. Those policies include having a good culture that is centered around integrity and authenticity. So the goal is we want to reduce the risk and we want to stop any attacks from happening so that we protect people's information and their privacy. So why does it matter? Overall, if we don't practice integrity, if we don't have ethics, if we don't have a culture of security and follow leadership that actually cares about doing the right thing, well, then businesses, governments, and individuals are going to potentially be exposing private data, exposing PII, exposing financial information, and then that could cause financial and legal damages, but most importantly, it could impact human lives. So in essence, we as an organization have to do our part, and as cybersecurity professionals have to do our part to, again, protect human lives. All right. Let's go ahead and do some questions. So this is going to be the question thread. I love that picture, Keith. That is a great example. I think I answered that question, Hamed. Good question. That's funny. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and look at the answers. So everyone is saying the question is here. Are strategically placed within the net to alert opponents. What type of deception strategy is this? Okay, so the idea here is we are looking at fake email accounts containing sensitive information such as login credentials. Login credentials is a key term here. So the answer would actually be Honeytokens, because it's asking what type of deception technique is being employed. Sure, it could be one of these, but the main element here is login tokens. So it is D. Jyoti, I see your question about why is it not CIAE with ethics. It's because when it does come down to cybersecurity, those three elements are the three most important: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The confidentiality piece, that actually does involve ethics. All right, second question. A company creates a VM that simulates a production server, complete with realistic looking data and services. This VM is isolated from the actual production. What type of deception technology is being deployed? It's a virtual machine. I see a lot of people picking. We got some people saying A, B, A. In this case, it would be considered a honeypot, because it is one virtual machine. It is one machine, so it is considered a honeypot. If it was a bunch of machines, it would be a honeynet. If it was a file, it would be a honeyfile. Last question. And this is a last question thread. I think that's the last question, yeah. So for the last question thread, what does PII stand for in the context of information security? This one you should memorize. This is something you definitely should memorize. And we all got it. Personally identifiable information. Good job, everyone. All right. And that's everything I wanted to go through. I hope that you all enjoyed this specific class.